Now, the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, has warned the West that Russia may deploy long-range nuclear weapons in his country. He made the claim during his State of the Nation address. Moscow has already announced plans to deploy short-range tactical nuclear warheads in Belarus, a decision the West has denounced. The deployment of longer-range strategic weapons in Belarus would mark a major escalation. Lukashenko also used his address to call for an immediate, unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine. For more, let's bring in DW correspondent Jennifer Palke, who was following Lukashenko's speech from Riga. Hi, Jennifer. The Belarusian president says Russian strategic longer-range nuclear weapons may be deployed in his country. Now, that's an announcement that would surely be a significant escalation of the conflict.
Yes, it will be an escalation of the conflict if it really happens, because so far he just announced plans and we're not even sure if this will really work. But what it really is a tactic to put pressure on Ukraine and on Kiev, and also spark fears in Ukrainian soldiers and the civil society, because Ukrainian borders are borders to Belarus, and having nuclear weapon stations so close to Ukraine is quite dangerous and will spark fear. But he also stated that, quote, that Ukraine's stance on fighting against Russia till the last Ukrainian is stupid, because Ukraine will never be able to win against an atomic superpower like Russia. But it's also quite important to note that Alexander Lukashenko stated that he himself asked Putin to deploy these weapons, not for the war in Ukraine, but to be able to protect Belarus from Western threats and influences.
OK, so some mixed messages, maybe, because we've got this threatening speak, and yet Lukashenko called also in his speech for a ceasefire, which he hasn't done before. So how much of a surprise was it to hear him say that?
Well, it was a huge surprise because, as you said, he never said anything in that regard. But what was even more surprising was that he kept going back to the topic of peace talks and a ceasefire throughout the first half of his speech. He stated that Belarus and he himself, quote, ran like a dog between the two presidents to help and negotiate peace talks as well as a ceasefire. But he also stated that it's important that this ceasefire will only take place if Western and Eastern influences will not be put into Ukraine and Russia.
OK, now Moscow reacted very quickly to Lukashenko's words. It immediately rejected the idea of a ceasefire, didn't it?
Exactly. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov right away rejected the possibility of a ceasefire right now in this moment. And of course, he blamed Ukraine and the continuing fighting of Ukrainian soldiers against Russian soldiers for that. He stated as long as Ukrainian soldiers will fight Russians, the so-called special military operation will continue. But he also stated that Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko will discuss the topic of a possible ceasefire and peace talks in Lukashenko's scheduled visit to Moscow next week.
Jennifer, thanks so much for that. That's Jennifer Palke, DW correspondent in Riga.